August 15, 1943. The Foggia airfield in Italy roared with the sounds of war. Above the Adriatic countryside, a German Messerschmitt Bf 109 raced through the skies, its pilot confident, unaware that death was diving silently from above. He never saw the American P-40 Warhawk until it was too late. A stream of 50 caliber machine gun fire tore through his fuselage. Flames burst across the German plane as it spiraled toward the ground. The pilot had no chance. Watching from the cockpit of his Warhawk, First Lieutenant Robert Bobby Jackson knew what had just happened. At only 23 years old, the young man from Cleveland, Ohio, had scored his first kill. But this was no ordinary victory. Jackson had just done what German Luftwaffe commanders thought impossible. A black pilot had shot down one of their elite fighters. The swastika that Jackson painted on his P-40 Warhawk that afternoon was just the beginning. It marked the first of 112 enemy aircraft that would eventually fall to men the Germans would learn to call the Schwarz-Vogelmännchen, the Blackbirdmen. It was a nickname born not of respect at first, but of disbelief. Nazi ideology classified black people as Untermenschen, subhuman, incapable of mastering complex machinery or demonstrating bravery in combat. In Germany, the Nuremberg laws had even forbidden marriages between Germans and people of African descent. But in the skies over Europe, those racial theories were about to shatter against cold, hard reality. What German pilots didn't know as they prepared to intercept American bombers in 1943 was that the 100th Fighter Squadron, soon to be part of the 333rd Fighter Group, was unlike any unit they had faced before. These are not ordinary pilots. They had been trained harder, pushed further, and judged more harshly than almost any of their white counterparts in the U.S. Army Air Forces. For them, every mission carried two battles, one against German aircraft and one against the crushing weight of prejudice. They flew not only to defend their country, but to prove to an entire world that skill, discipline, and courage knew no color. Their statistics would soon tell the story. Over 15,000 combat sorties, 1,178 missions, and 112 aerial victories. They would go on to escort hundreds of bombing missions with fewer losses than almost any other fighter group in the war. But the road to that moment, to that first swastika painted on Jackson's Warhawk, had begun years earlier, not in combat, but in the segregated, hostile environment of the United States itself. Back in 1925, the U.S. Army War College had published a shameful report titled The Employment of Negro Manpower in War. It concluded that black men were, quote, inherently weak in character and inferior in mentality to the white man. Official Army Air Force's military doctrine claimed that black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical roles and the courage for combat leadership. With views like these entrenched in America's armed forces, it seemed impossible that black men would ever fly fighters for their country. But even as prejudice ruled official policy, individual pioneers had already proven otherwise. During World War I, Eugene Bullard had flown for France because the United States refused to let him join its air service. In 1921, Bessie Coleman earned her pilot's license in France because no American flight school would accept her. Civil rights leaders pressed the government relentlessly. Figures like Walter White of the NAACP, Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie lobbied tirelessly for inclusion. Black newspapers asked the Roosevelt administration a damning question. How could America fight for democracy abroad while denying at home? The pressure worked. When Franklin Roosevelt campaigned for his unprecedented third term in 1940, he needed black votes in key northern cities. The War Department announced an all-black flying unit, the 100th Pursuit Squadron. Officially, it was called an experiment. The military's expectation was simple. They assumed it would fail. The man chosen to lead them was Colonel William Bill Campbell, son of America's first black general. Campbell had survived 4 years of silent treatment at West Point, where white cadets refused to speak to him outside official duties. He knew isolation. He knew prejudice, and he knew what was at stake. When Campbell took his squadron of 26 pilots to North Africa in May 1943, he carried not just his own honor, but the aspirations of 13 million Black Americans. At first, their white commanders tried to sideline them. Colonel William Morrison, who oversaw the 34th Fighter Group, distrusted the 100th from start. He assigned them menial patrol missions and kept them away from real combat. But soon there was no hiding from battle. On June 15, 1943, the Freeman field pilots flew their first combat mission against Italian targets. They held formation. They protected their bombers, and they did not break under fire. It was the first sign that this experiment was no failure. Then came August 15, 1943, the day Robert Jackson proved the world wrong. When his bullets ripped into that German fighter and sent it plunging into the Italian earth, every Freeman field airman knew something had changed. Their victory wasn't just over one Luftwaffe pilot. It was over years of doubt, mockery, and slander. Black ground crews who had endured insults and sneers erupted in celebration. History had been made. From that day forward, the Freeman Field Airmen's reputation grew. At Anzio in February 1944, they faced superior German Focke-Wulf 190s in outdated P-40S and shot down as many as 13 enemy aircraft in 2 days. Even their own critics were silenced. Reports that had once called them unaggressive were proven wrong by hard combat. The War Department could no longer deny their skill. By mid-1944, the Freeman Field Airmen were flying the sleek, powerful P-51 Mustang. With its crimson, painted tails, their aircraft became known simply as the Red Tails. At first, bomber crews didn't know who these escorts were. They only knew one thing: the Red Tails never abandoned them. While other fighter groups sometimes chased German planes to boost their kill counts, the Red Tails stayed close, guarding the bombers all the way home. Word spread quickly among the bomber crews. If you can, request the Red Tails. Their greatest test came in April 1945 when they escorted bombers deep into Berlin. Waiting for them were the Messerschmitt Me 262 jets, the world's first operational jet fighters faster than anything the Allies had. But the Freeman Field Airmen adapted. They studied the jets' weaknesses, ambushed them in their turns, and that day destroyed 3 in a single mission. It was more than most American fighter groups managed in the entire war. Not every mission was a triumph. Dozens of Freeman field pilots became prisoners of war. Some killed, some captured. Yet, even in German camps, they experienced a strange irony. White American prisoners often treated them with more equality there than they had back home. By war's end, the numbers told the story better than any speech. Over 1,500 missions flown, more than 15,000 sorties, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air, another 150 destroyed on the ground, 96 distinguished flying crosses earned, only 27 bombers lost under their escort, far fewer than average. The Freeman Field Airmen had done more than fight the Luftwaffe. They had fought prejudice, ignorance, and hatred and won. Their legacy lived on not just in statistics, but in change. In 1948, President Truman signed the order to integrate the U.S. military, influenced directly by the Freeman Field Airmen's record. Colonel Campbell would go on to become the first black general in the U.S. Air Force. Decades later, America would finally recognize them with a Congressional Gold Medal. The Germans, who once mocked them as blackbirdmen, ended the war acknowledging their skill. The bomber crews, who survived because of them, called them Red Tail Angels, and history would remember them as men who fought 2 enemies at once, fascism abroad and racism at home, and defeated both. The Freeman Field Airmen proved that courage has no color, that excellence cannot be denied, and that even in the darkest skies of war, justice can find its wings. Robert Jackson, the young pilot from Cleveland who scored that first kill over Italy, would later say that every victory belonged not to individual pilots, but to every black American who had been told they weren't good enough, smart enough, or brave enough to serve their country with honor. The Red Tails had proven them all wrong, one mission at a time, one victory at a time, until the world could no longer ignore the truth. The impact extended far beyond the cockpit. When white bomber crews returned to base and spoke of the Red Tails who had saved their lives, racial barriers began to crack in ways no government policy could have achieved. Men who had grown up believing in racial superiority found themselves owing their lives to black pilots they had been taught to despise. Lieutenant Tommy Rodriguez, a bombardier from Texas, wrote to his family after a mission over Munich. "The colored boys in the red-tailed Mustangs kept us alive today. I don't care what anyone back home says about them. They're warriors, plain and simple." Such testimonies spread through the bomber squadrons like wildfire. Ground crews began treating the Red Tails with newfound respect. Mechanics who once ignored black pilots now fought to service their aircraft first. The transformation wasn't complete, but it was undeniable. Combat had a way of revealing truth that peacetime prejudice couldn't hide. Skill spoke louder than skin color when lives hung in the balance. In German prisoner of war camps, captured Freeman field pilots faced a different kind of battle. Luftwaffe interrogators, trained to break Allied airmen through psychological warfare, found themselves confounded by these black Americans. Hans Müller, a German intelligence officer, later wrote in his memoirs that the Negro pilots displayed a resolve unlike anything he had encountered. They carried themselves with quiet dignity despite facing double persecution, first as enemy combatants, then as black men in a white supremacist regime. Some German guards, indoctrinated with Nazi racial theories, expected the black prisoners to be subservient or broken. Instead, they found men who maintained military bearing even in captivity. Captain James Washington from Detroit organized educational classes in the camps, teaching mathematics and literature to fellow prisoners. His quiet leadership impressed even German officers who had been taught to view blacks as inferior. One guard confessed years later that watching these men had shaken his faith in everything he had been told about racial hierarchy. When the war ended and the Freeman field pilots returned home, they carried more than medals and memories. They carried proof that excellence transcends prejudice. Robert Jackson settled in Cleveland, becoming a commercial pilot and flight instructor. He spent decades teaching young black aviators that the sky belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. Colonel Campbell rose through the ranks to become the Air Force's first black general, his office walls lined with photos of the Red Tails who had paved his path. The 333rd Fighter Group was eventually integrated into Air Force history as one of the most distinguished units of World War II. Their legacy endured in every barrier broken, every stereotype shattered, every young person who looked up and saw possibility where others saw limitation. The men who had been mocked, as the Schwartz-Vogel mentioned, had proven that courage knows no color, that skill cannot be contained by prejudice, and that when justice takes flight, it soars higher than hatred ever could. The Red Tails had earned their place in history, one victory at a time.